Yeah, so my name's Matt, and I work in educational psychology and conduct a lot of research looking at students' motivations, students' metacognitions, meaning how they think about their own learning, and the kind of learning strategies that they tend to use when they're in authentic environments, so the kind of courses that we study here at UNLV. And the title of my presentation is a little clunky, just like my lab name, so it's Learning Theory and Analytics as Guides to Improving Undergrad STEM Education. So this project is something I've been talking about around campus with folks from different departments. Obviously, some of the STEM departments like math, sciences, and with a lot of folks who are interested in educational technology around campus. But I'm particularly excited to talk to first-year experience folks and second-year experience folks, because really the goals of this project are really directed at those kinds of students. So I kind of want to start with something that you are already experts in, and that is the need. So if we think about who the students are as they come to UNLV, this is that space where they have what we would call maybe their most potential and their most strong challenge in terms of trying to figure out what it is to negotiate being a college student. So if we think of the competing demands that face college students that are entirely novel in some cases, we have students who are really trying to continue to focus on their studies, but all of a sudden have to manage this in the context of managing relationships they bring with them from high school, new relationships they're trying to build, and family relationships they're trying to maintain, love life they're trying to maintain, different stressors here. All that on top of trying to sort out finances. Either are they working, or are they sorting out how financial aid works and trying to understand that. So the stress is palpable in many of these students. And the management skills we find tend to be somewhat lacking sometimes on any one front and sometimes across all of them. Fortunately, there's also pretty solid opportunity here. So we know there's ample need in adjusting to college, but there's a lot of research on how we can support these kind of students. So with respect to learning, there's ample research on learning strategies and how to supply different kinds of instruction to students so they can take these up. And we also know that we have a lot of resources here at UNLV, and many places now are emerging, to really help us understand student behavior via data systems so that we can really kind of know who is the student who needs the support. And our goals are then just to kind of tailor support on an individual basis to students. So the overarching research question that I kind of aim for in this research is how do we develop students' abilities to learn how to learn, and how do we tailor the support to individuals? So kind of this broad supporting student learning overall, and then figuring out who are the ones most in need so that we can really try and be adaptive in the way that we approach students. So the title that was at the beginning here, I tend to abbreviate as learning tags, just to save on the tongue twistering. But the premise is reasonably simple. So in the first phase of the project, I've worked with faculty here to provide students with resources that support student learning. So we know what kind of resources teachers tend to want to provide students so that they can learn in their courses. And then we develop resources to train students how to use those kind of resources. And then lastly, once we know whether or not students are learning efficiently or not, we can really try and figure out which students are the ones likely to struggle and use data to identify them at a time so we can actually help on time. So we can reach out to those students. And importantly, we can leave alone the other ones who seem to be doing just fine, and we might be distracting by trying to really push more resources towards them. So all this is wrapped in a single project that has some funding from the National Science Foundation. And what I want to do today is just kind of talk through a little bit of the infrastructure that we're developing here at UNLV, and then some of the early findings from some of the projects that are focused on student learning and on data systems that can help us adapt to students. So the first part of this is really just about providing students with resources. So I really kind of want to know, how do students use the resources their instructors provide? What behaviors or what uses of different kinds of resources are related to achievement? And how motivated are students to learn? Given that we only have half an hour, I'm going to kind of skip over this one, but if you're interested in student motivation, I'll come back to it at the very end and can show you some backup slides if we have time. So if we think about resources for learning, we can do a lot within the systems that we have on campus. So I work with teachers to ensure that they're using Web Campus to its potential in terms of using it as kind of at least a clearinghouse to host digital versions of the paper resources that they give to students to supplement textbooks, and also use some of the tools to develop new resources. So that might be actually utilizing the calendar as a planning tool to help students be aware of when assignments are going on. Making sure that there's digital copies of a syllabus so that they have a reference to it on demand in their pocket, since they could access it that way if they chose. And we develop learning goals checklists so that students can not only go to their syllabus to understand what it is their instructor is aiming at, but also so they can monitor their own progress towards those. So we kind of articulate what was otherwise that very static list of learning objectives that you care passionately about and they don't understand, into a set of possible items that they can master by the end of the semester and that they can check in on to see how close they are and theoretically plan their study based upon that. So we host all the resources that teachers would normally hand out in class or make available, so lecture notes, any kind of assignment documentation, and then the solutions to those assignments. We also use the assessment tools in Blackboard to give students more opportunity to practice and to monitor their learning. So we build quizzes that align to the individual chapters that students can use repeatedly to train up their ability to retrieve information, can practice explaining more complicated concepts, et cetera, and get feedback since these are all automated. And then obviously we cue students to their grades, which is what they look at most often on here, to measure their own performance as it accrues over the semester, and then monitoring their process. So we kind of give them just like a high-level guide of what learning should look like when you're organizing your own study with some prompts to help get them thinking about planning, organizing, strategies, and monitoring if those are working. So we do all this partially to support students and partially to understand students. So there's an entire data infrastructure on the backside of this that help us see what students use, when, and eventually why. Oop, a little bit of a default here. So the data logging infrastructure that I'm describing here is really just a monitoring system that's already in place here at UNLV. So OIT has a tool called Splunk, which is what you're looking at here, and it captures every click that students make on the server logs. So anytime students access any content on Blackboard, which is the platform, which we call Web Campus, the request goes in, it logs their request and sends the student the content. We just capture the request via a search in the courses that we're working with. And then we push it into table form so we can figure out, well, this is from a math course, it's calculus, it's in section 1001, it's from the fall, and here's what the content is. So this is somebody using the learning assistant that we built. So we just get a running log of the different things that students do, and then we organize them so we can understand them. So here's an example of a table that we've built where we look at, in week 1, students' use of assignments, communication tools, visits to content folders, et cetera. So we could see that a particular student, whose ID is now blocked out here, this student went to 5 different content areas in their site in the first week of class. They went to 1 content folder and downloaded 2 items in that span. And then we could drill down to see which items they're downloading, et cetera, if that's important to us. So we can get individual student data, and then we can kind of monitor the kinds of use that students are conducting on a course-by-course basis. So we can just build dashboards to look at, well, where do students go? So obviously they go to content areas a lot because you have to get to the other stuff. They do a lot of monitoring of learning. So they interact with the assessments that we build with some frequency here. They visit planning documents pretty frequently when they look at syllabi, et cetera. And here is kind of like an overarching view of how they use everything over the entire course of the semester. So anybody have any guesses as to what's going on at these little mountaintops here? Yeah, so this is exam 1, exam 2, exam 3, and then the final. So activity rises at all these times, but the shape of the different polygons here show you like, well, what students prioritize in advance of a test, and we can see proportionally what happens before a test versus what happens in the time when right after a test, kind of like the refractory period if you're in sciences. So when stress is lowest, I guess. So we can see that these kinds of learning behaviors do correlate with achievement outcomes. So if we look at semester grade and final exam grade, we see some pretty solid correlations between general activity kind of stuff like visits to content folders. We see some relationship with accessing of notes, completion of assignments. And if we look at like self-assessment practices and things that we teach students to do in the learning sciences, you can see some correlation as well there with semester grades. Oddly, we get something weird with exam grades there, but it's not quite as high. So the implications to this, to me, are that students do use resources when they're provided digitally, and that certain resources are related to better outcomes. So ideally, we should teach students how to use these resources. So if they're accessing them, they're using them in the correct ways so that their outcomes can be improved. So that's step 2, teach students how to learn. You guys kind of all do this in your classrooms anyway. Some of that is disciplinary, depending upon if you're teaching them how to learn in a science context, an English context, whatever. But there's some more general strategies that students coming out of high school aren't always aware of. So in high school, it's much more scaffolded. Oftentimes, it's very performance-oriented rather than learning-oriented. So students don't always have the chance to really learn learning practices, since teachers are really kind of pushing the content almost all the time. So here, we're trying to figure out, can we improve student achievement if we teach them to use the resources that instructors are providing? And really all that is we're providing students already, but we need to help them learn how to use them effectively. So we're going to train them. So the content of what this training is just hosted in 3 modules in Web Campus. The first one introduces them to learning strategies that are known to work from a couple decades worth of research. a second batch that teaches them how to manage picking learning strategies, how to plan, organize, et cetera, and then how to manage your behavior as a college student in this kind of environment. So bringing back our confused student from the first slide, her name is Emily in our story, and her dilemma is the typical realities and challenges that you face when you go to college. And our instructional approach in these modules is to really help students learn about a strategy and why it works, so some direct instruction about a new topic, the science behind it, see how much of an effect it's had on college students previously, and then help them search for resources that'll help them implement that strategy in their own course. And then lastly, we do a little bit of planning so that they have some kind of intention to actually do this. They can think through what the practice would look like so that we can make sure that they're capable of adopting it. So what this looks like, we'll show them some graphs that show what happens when you self-test, show them some resources so they can see what like a spaced practice schedule would look like, so they can think about what you would do instead of cramming, which leads to better learning outcomes, or maybe in addition to cramming, I guess we'll say. And then some self-explanation evidence that shows that if you explain something to yourself repeatedly, it improves your retrieval, improves your fluency in the process or the concept as well. So we teach them about this, and then we prompt them to kind of say what they learned, and then we push them back towards their course and say, well, where in your course can you find resources that give you the opportunity to self-test? How can you plan to space your practice based on what your syllabus looks like? What kinds of resources are available in your textbook, the companion site, online, that you can use as media to practice self-explaining and then checking your answer? So in the second one, we teach them how to self-regulate their learning. So really, we get them really focused in on learning objectives. So when we define a task in college, the task is dictated by the instructor, or in some cases the university, if we're talking about the university learning objectives. So many students struggle to even identify what a learning objective is other than, oh, the content. So they don't know the depth of it. So we really kind of focus them on the two parts where it's both topic as well as level of comprehension, and link them to words that they can use to figure that out, and then push them towards strategies that are appropriate towards that kind of learning objective. And that kind of takes us through the setting goals, making plans about using the right strategy, and then we kind of talk them through what it is to monitor using some self-assessment practices, some checklists of the learning objectives, to figure out how much progress we're making towards understanding our learning objective. With respect to Module 3, this is a little bit higher level, so thinking about just operating in college in general and how we manage our behaviors when we know we're supposed to be learning, but there's a lot of fun stuff to do instead. So we talk them through making implementation intentions, so like if I go to the library, I will turn off my cell phone, or other kinds of behavioral scripting where if you make this kind of intention with a then on it, you tend to be more apt to follow it. We help them kind of keep perspective through some mental contrasting. So we focus them on kind of the highs, we focus them on the challenges between, and then connect the two so they can keep a balanced perspective as to the challenges they face as they learn. And then do a little bit of direct instruction about avoiding distractions. So taking them through the science that shows that multitasking in its typical form doesn't work, but when it's blocked, it does. And we take them through the evidence that pretty much anything, auditory or multimedia, does soak up some of your cognitive ability and keep you from learning as well. No matter if you're a person who studies best listening to music, you're still really not. So we study this by looking at students in biology right now, and we're expanding to calculus and college algebra, as well as engineering, and just comparing students across those who take these modules in the early weeks of their course to students who just get extra content in the course, so some kind of enrichment. We give them the resources via Web Campus, give them announcements weekly to say, hey, you got a week to complete this module, then we move on to the next one, move on to the next one. We're trying it blocked now, might be too much to do all in 1 week. But generally, we're working through this in a couple of different contexts to see if a general approach to supporting learning transfers across multiple disciplines. So in the past, we've randomized by section. Now we're randomizing within a course using adaptive release to try and make it a really robust experiment. And we're replicating with different kind of levels of entry, so different kinds of students who are in calculus or in college algebra. And I'd like to keep working all the way down to developmental math, who I spoke with a couple days ago. So what do we get? So when students do the Learning to Learn training, in this kind of the second unit of the course, we do see a significant difference between that and enrichment on the upcoming exams and quizzes. So we see a group difference here. So we get immediate effects right after the intervention. So if we do it during Unit 2, by Exam 3, they're seemingly implementing this, and they're outperforming their peers by 3 to 5 points on this exam. If we break it out by their Exam 1 performance, the A students, the B students, and the C students look a little different. So if we look at quizzes, exam 3 and exam 4, we're seeing that on quizzes, this kind of training seems to be making a difference for the students who are struggling the most. On exams, it seems like it's kind of that middle group who are like trying to tip towards that grade they need to move forward in their major, but maybe not quite on top of everything. And then in exam 4, this is kind of a delay after we've done the training. So we're talking a month or two after that. We're seeing some sustained effects in these two groups, but we're also seeing that the A students perhaps don't really benefit that much from this kind of intervention. It's not terribly surprising because A students are probably A students in high school, and there's probably a reason for that as well. So these are some students who may be able to manage their own learning without any additional training or assistance. So if we think about the practical impact here, if we're getting a 4-point difference and a 2-point difference on 2 exams, plus a fractional difference across many quizzes, this adds up. So what we're seeing effectively for students is about a third to a half a grade point difference. So from A minus to a full B or A, et cetera. So we can increase student achievement by teaching them to use resources effectively, but not all students need the training. So the next phase of this is trying to figure out, well, who are these students that actually need the help, and who are the ones that don't, and how shall we help them? So study 3 is about identifying struggling students, helping them to learn. What we want to know here is, can we identify students who are likely to perform poorly in class, and can we do it early enough that we can actually do something to help those students within the same course? So we've got 15 weeks to work with here. And the general approach is to study students' behaviors in the first 4 weeks. Ideally, look at it in Splunk, understand the behavior, and then do some data mining to figure out, well, what can we extract from this data to describe behavior patterns across students who are high achieving, low achieving, et cetera. And then once we've built our model, we push it back to Splunk so that we can kind of build our model right in the software and then generate a report as to who's likely to struggle here. And at that point, we can do something to alert them. And then we can compare those who we alert and maybe those who deserved an alert but we're just following to see if we're having an effect. And then we can see how that impacts their performance on exams, immediate, and then over the course of the semester, and their behaviors that follow the alert. So the hard part of this is building the prediction model. So what that requires is looking at all the students' behaviors and then running a whole bunch of different algorithms to see if we can develop a regression equation or a decision tree or some other model where one or more student behaviors predict a student outcome. And we're constraining this to the first 4 weeks so that if we know by week 4, we're only a third of the way in, and in biology, we're before the first exam. So we can actually develop a prediction of their performance before they start acquiring performances. So we've had some success with this where we're able to predict students' grades within our training data set in the fall of 2014, and this is equally predictive in spring 2015, where it looks like this. So if we think of true students who get a B or better, we're targeting a threshold of B because that's what's required in the for kinesiology and nursing students to move forward in this course. We have students who get an A or a B, students who don't, and then who we predict to get an A or a B, and students who don't. So of those students who don't get the A or B, 148 of them, we're accurately predicting about 3/4 of them, a little bit more than that. But as we do that, we're kind of liberal in terms of who we're using to predict. So we predict 117 B earners and some A earners also seem like they might be somebody who's going to struggle. So we're sufficiently accurate that we capture everybody except for a fraction who needs a message, but we may be over-messaging to some degree where there's some students who are above threshold, some distance, who are also going to get some kind of intervention that they may or may not need. So we need to design our intervention so that it seems appropriate for these folks and is helpful to them, but isn't awkward to give to the students who we might be missing the mark on. So we have this model. How should we use it? Having talked to some folks in the field about this who work at a higher level across like MOOCs and for-profit colleges and the folks who are really kind of way into the data mining and the pushing of messages to students, we figured out that the message needs to be reasonably informal and casual, needs to come from an instructor so that it feels like a part of the course and the instructor has presence to it. But there's a lot that we don't know as well. So there's ample room for experimentation here in terms of how do we personalize, how doom and gloom are we when we say, hey, based on 4 weeks, it looks like things are going to go poorly for you. So how do we deliver that message in a way that is not creepy, not demotivating, and not inaccurate? So the approach that we'll be taking on President's Day when we push this out to biology students will be hi, so-and-so or not, based on experimental manipulation. Our first exam's coming up in a week or so. I really want to make sure you're on top of your learning. And include or not include, I'm a little concerned based on the way you've been using the resources in this course that you might not do well. So this could be a red flag that draws their attention and gets them to engage with some of the resources we'll provide them. It could be something that demotivates them. It could be something that at least gets their attention enough that they keep reading, which is a concern with some of the biology students that we talked to about this. And then we just kind of hit students with well, we want to make sure you're doing well. I want to check in, push you to some resources. The first is a set of advice from students who've passed this course in the past and done pretty well. You might learn from that. The second is a little more intensive. It's a training program that you guys learned about 5 minutes ago that students have access to in their course and they can self-pace through. And then we just kind of direct them to it and make sure that the students see it's coming from their instructor. So this is kind of a prototype of what it will go out eventually. So these are actual UNLV students who are undergrads in my lab who reflected back on their anatomy experience. And we've tried to make the bubbles give the high-level version of this for those who really don't want to read it but are willing to commit 30 seconds or so. And then give the full story for those who will give 5 minutes. And then pair this with the full set of training modules so that students who are really into it can learn from the whole set of different resources that we could provide. So stay tuned as to whether or not that'll work. Hopefully next year I'll be able to present that part of it and say, hey, it's going well, or here's what we learned about which versions of this do work. And I just kind of want to end there and just focus us back on the learning process. So if we start with motivation, students need enough motivation to start and sustain motivation so they don't stop learning, to engage in the right kinds of behaviors and to achieve the learning outcomes they're really going for. We can intervene a number of different ways. So we can try and train them to learn, have a direct effect on their use of behaviors. We can send early warnings to try and spur more behavior. And we can also do some kinds of other focusing on their motivation. So I didn't talk anything about this. We can talk about it offline if you like. But there are many motivational writing prompts that we can fold in to try and interact with some of the behavioral trainings or just use on their own to have a direct effect, which are really light in terms of student investment, really flexible to incorporate across different courses, and reasonably impactful in both motivation and learning outcomes. So with that, I will end there and just end with the idea that a combination of learning theory and analytics does make a pretty powerful toolkit, but it requires some sharpening, and we need to personalize it for our own environment here. So, end with a thank you to all the folks locally who work on this, all the people who are advising us on what to do and not do, to everybody at OIT especially who's really done a lot of programming to help pull this off, to funders, and you guys for your attention and any clarifying questions that you guys might have. I have some questions that I would ask you later or things to think about later, but we'll wait and switch gears and let Mackenzie take over for a bit.
I'm actually going to be talking today more anecdotally, so it's not a research study, but Top Hat is a product that I used in my class in fall of 2015, and I was asked to sort of share what that experience was like. Laurel did a great job giving a brief introduction, so I'll spare you that. The course that I introduced Top Hat into in the fall was a public health course. So PBH 435, HED 635 is a cross-listed course, Health Studies on Dangerous Drugs. So I have freshmen through grad students in the course, and it does satisfy a UNLV social science requirement. So I have all majors, all different interests. Interestingly, this particular course, I think I have it a little bit easy as far as engagement of students goes. It may not be terribly surprising to you that college students might be interested in learning more about drugs. So they're sort of with me on the journey, and we do talk about the health effects and sort of the public health implications, but they're already a little keyed into the topic, and I might have a bit of an easier time than some other courses do. That said, just like with any class, you are faced with issues of sort of distractions to student learning. So I used Top Hat, which is an integrated or an interactive teaching platform, to try to increase student engagement in this particular class as sort of a test. I will put it out to all of you that are teaching. What is a major distraction in your class? Oh, thank you, thank you. This is a major distraction in class. So when you are looking out at your entire class and you see just the top of all of your students' heads because they're looking at their phones, they're looking at their tablets, they're looking at their laptops. This is not an unusual practice and also not one that's likely to go away. So I actually used some technology myself to poke fun at it that We know you're texting, you're not doing a good job of hiding it. It is a tragedy that you have not been able to check Facebook or Instagram for the last hour, but we want you to stay engaged in the material. That's sort of a foreign concept for people that have technology as part of their everyday life. It's implanted, it's a surgical extension of their body, right, to have a smartphone. So if you ask students what their most prized possession is, smartphone consistently makes the top of that list. It's not going away. We are certainly in an age where pretty much all of our students at this point are familiar with the internet, wireless connections. They have the devices that get them connected and they use them regularly. Sometimes to our demise, regularly while in the classroom. So multiple times students are taking out their phone. I did just pull a little bit of background data for you as far as use of technology for non-class related purposes. And it probably doesn't surprise you that most of our students, at least a couple of times, are using their technology for something other than class related activities. So even if they have their laptop open, it's on your PowerPoint for a little bit, and then it's on Facebook for the rest of the time. So we know that they're checking. What are they doing? Actively texting. It's not always their mom that they're texting, right? But that's a problem too, because we have this connection of constant, you might have parents texting, you might have the boyfriend, girlfriend, the friends, etc. We're all connected. So texting, using social media, not uncommon practice in any classroom these days. What might be interesting though is from an instructor perspective, we tend to find this distracting. If you ask students, they don't think they're distracted. So much like with Matt talking about you think you're really great at multitasking, this is not a concern. If asked, they don't think their use of technology is distracting to their learning at all. And they actually aren't all that bothered by their peers using technology either. So we are overly concerned to a point that probably many of you have technology-related policies in your syllabus. You're talking about it regularly, turn your phones off, put them away. You can only use your laptop for notes. Doesn't always work, but we're constantly trying to police it, and they don't even see a problem with this usage. So some of the issues, and I myself have attempted that on a few occasions, trying to enforce keeping the phones away. But there are some potential problems that are highlighted in the literature from having too restrictive of a policy against technology. One of those is simply that you sort of look like the old dinosaur professor that is not staying up on the times, and that technology is positive and we should be embracing it. And so your relationship with the students might be impacted if they sort of view you in that way. Also, students feel like they're not trusted with their own learning. So I pay to go to school here. If I can look at my Facebook real quick and get back to the content, who are you to say that that means I'm not understanding the content or that I'm not otherwise engaged? So they want some control in their learning process, and technology is part of that. And then lastly, I'm sure many of you have been in a faculty meeting where we ourselves are glued to a phone, answering an email. Technology is a part of our lives as well. Also, if you're a professor that likes to show videos and do interactive demonstrations, to totally squash all technology in your classroom is probably unrealistic. So it's a little bit of a give and take between students have technology and are going to use it. We have technology at our disposal. We want to use it. So then how can we use it most effectively? So this is sort of where Top Hat enters into my conversation. So I am not a representative of Top Hat, so I'll be speaking about their program today. There are other similar platforms out there that do similar things that may interest you. I did not fully vet Top Hat before using them. They approached me, I liked what they had to say, I was willing to try using the product in my class. So per their language, what are they? Comprehensive teaching platform that helps you easily create an interactive lecture experience. A few requirements of this. You do have to, as a student, subscribe to the service. So it is free for instructors, but students do have to pay. There are semester-long memberships, year-long memberships, or lifetime memberships if you're at an institution that widely uses Top Hat. But for $24, they were able to have access to the system for the duration of my class. And I just sort of called it required technology. Okay. Other thing they have to have is some sort of web-enabled or text-capable device. So my first question was, what if students don't have one of those things? And on day one of class, I learned that all of my students had those things, and it wasn't in question because it's so common for students to have access to these materials. Interestingly, if you do not have a smartphone, tablet, laptop, you can still participate in Top Hat using just SMS text capabilities. So even someone that has an older version of a phone could participate in Top Hat. There are a variety of features that they offer. I wanted to just highlight the few that I used, and then I will sort of show you what that looks like in actual practice also. One is taking attendance. So at the beginning of every class, you hit take attendance. A unique code pops up that the student either through the website or the app or the text has to text in to log their attendance. You yourself, of course, can set how long that window is available. So you better be here in the first 30 seconds of class, or I can minimize it and you've got 5 minutes to get here, and you decide that. But I did use it to track attendance. I also used it to do interactive slideshow presentations. So much like you might upload your PowerPoint to Web Campus, instead I uploaded a PowerPoint to the Top Hat application for deploying in class. The reason I liked Top Hat is whatever I put on this screen, if we were using Top Hat, you all would see on your devices. So your laptop, your tablet, your phone has my presentation on it. Not right now, but when we enter Top Hat, that's what it would look like. The other thing that is interesting is I can annotate my presentation, and that will display on your devices as well. So if I have something particularly important that I want to star, want to underline, I can do that in real time. It will show up on your presentation. You will know that that's important. The other thing that I liked about the presentation feature is students cannot advance it. So it's a surprise. You don't know how long my lecture is, and you don't know what's coming up next. Okay, so they can backtrack at their own pace if they missed content and needed to revisit, but they cannot proceed beyond where I'm at in the presentation. Much like with Web Campus, you can open it up and have it accessible after class if you want them to be able to review the entire content of your presentation, but during, you can sort of regulate how quickly they see it. And then what I thought was the most engaging aspect of Top Hat is actually their student response platform. So I was able to build into my lectures real-time discussions, as well as content-related questions, and also used their tournament feature. So as far as discussions go, basically every student that has registered with Top Hat has a login that's identifiable. You can actually poll students anonymously if you were interested in just getting class feedback. So even blind to the instructor. You can make it blind just to the rest of the class so that your individual responses are not viewable by name, but you can still see everybody's opinion on that particular topic. And then as far as content question goes, you also have an ability to decide if you want to give points or credit for people simply participating or for actually getting the question correct. So I tended to split that about half down the middle, like you get 50% of that point just for submitting, participating in class. You get another half of a point if you actually answer correctly, because this is content that we covered last class or that you should have read or whatever it is. So you can adjust that yourself. And then the exam review feature that I liked for the final exam actually puts students head to head for each round. So you were trying to beat correct answer before Laurel got her correct answer in. And there was actually a running scoreboard where students could see who had answered the most questions. So it kind of sparked that competitive spirit, and some frightened, I think only one that didn't like that. But that was not for credit, it was just for review purposes. So I used the Top Hat system for about 50 points of what I called class participation. That was a little less than 10% of my overall class. So it wasn't the bulk, but it certainly could plus or minus an entire grade, right, if you totally lapsed on your Top Hat participation. So I did want to take a brief second to show you sort of what Top Hat looks like in practice, hopefully. So to me, it was really reminiscent of Web Campus, and so it was fairly user-friendly as far as that goes. But logging into Web Campus, this is what it looked like from the instructor perspective. If I was to take attendance today, this is the code that pops up. Text in, use your app, use your website. Once I have everybody's attendance, or I'm satisfied that I don't want to take attendance anymore, I can either hide the code down at the side, give people a few more minutes to trickle in, okay, magnify it back. When you're done, you're done. And then this automatically populates in a grade book. So you have attendance for your students for every class period. The other features that I used, I would just load all of my modules in advance, so that would have my PowerPoint presentation, any associated questions that I wanted to ask for that particular presentation. And once you deploy it, this was actually a class that was live. So for example, when I posed a question, how many drugs can you name? These populated through. These are my users, and you get the entire class contributing to the conversation by texting in replies. So this was an example of one that was not graded, but could be submitted. Let's see what this, I'm not a Mac user, so my scrolling capability is my big limitation. Aha. All right, so here is where the presentation comes into play. So when you are ready to present, you magnify your content, and then I can advance through my presentation. So they would all see this on whatever type of device they had. So a smartphone, a laptop, it should be on their screen. So content matches the board. They can, I could advance it on this because this is the instructor view, but they wouldn't be able to get past this slide until we're done talking about how the dose makes the poison. For myself, I needed little friendly reminders about when it was time to ask a question. So I would include a little symbol for Top Hat in the bottom of my slide that said, oh, it's now time for a question. So let's pause and do that. And then you would have to go over to your sidebar, open up your question for deployment, and you could ask a multiple choice question, a discussion question, and see all of the responses. When you're done getting those responses, you disable submissions, go back to your regular content. So a couple different features. The way you create is much like you would for Web Campus. So I want to make a question. What kind of question do you want to make? I want to make a multiple choice question. You tell me the question content, which of those 4 answers is correct. The other nice thing is you can do some immediate polling as far as if the class got the question correct or not. So that was useful for engaging students in conversation. So here for this particular question, we were asking about the epi triangle. They could choose A, B, or C. And once we were done, we don't get any more submissions. And you can show the answer, get a report for how many students did in fact answer A. Okay, half of you missed it. We need to have more discussion about this particular topic. So fairly user-friendly. Like I said, it does take a little bit of practice as far as in motion, getting through the material to a point where you're comfortable, but it's not foreign if you've at all used Web Campus. So those are sort of the features that I used on Top Hat. There are others, things I did not do. You can apparently link it to Web Campus. So you don't have a gradebook in Top Hat and a gradebook in Web Campus. They can be merged. I did not attempt that. There are some more step-by-step demos that you can sort of assign to students where they're clicking and interacting. I didn't use those too frequently also. So what I found, and again, this was sort of just me saying, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, let's do it. This wasn't an experiment. I don't have a control group, and my only basis for comparison was the prior semester, let's say. So my prior full semester was the spring. One of the problems with just looking at potential outcomes for Top Hat was during this fall 2015 where I introduced Top Hat, I also simultaneously started using an electronic textbook that also had what they call Learn Smart technology. So that's a different program through McGraw-Hill. So to say that they have better learning outcomes, I can't attribute that entirely to Top Hat. But I had the same number of students, had 32 students both semesters, few more A's. For the most part, most students are not left behind in this class anyway. Again, I think the content sort of drives an ability to at least get a C in this one. So we mostly passed. What I did find interesting though was that attendance was improved. So in prior semesters, I still would have an attendance grade because I wanted to encourage you to come to class. Here, it wasn't so much attendance as if you didn't show up, you missed those 3 questions that I was gonna ask every 15 minutes during the course of my class. If you missed those, you missed out on the participation credit. So it encouraged you to actually attend to do the Top Hat participation every class. Also, I was interested in sort of student feedback from using Top Hat. So halfway through the semester, I was interested in a few things, and I sort of gave my students an assignment to complete a self-assessment. I wanted them to sort of evaluate their progress in the class so far, as well as give me some feedback about, do you like the electronic textbook and do you like Top Hat? So I asked them what their opinion of Top Hat was, and the opinion was largely positive. Some of the reasons, they already have this device. Okay, so I didn't have to buy a clicker. I already have a phone. It was more interactive, it was fast, they could see if they got something correct immediately, and they could see those points populate. It helped us feel involved in the lecture. Anecdotally, I think it was a great way to get students that wouldn't otherwise raise their hand to join in on the discussion to actually, fine, you're semi-anonymously submitting so we can talk about your perspective, even if personally you didn't like me to call you out. So mostly positive. My few limitations I have listed. I had a couple of students echo that they wish they didn't have to pay for it. Okay, understandable. Like I mentioned, it was not a problem for my particular group, but theoretically, if you have a student that doesn't have the resource, how do you give that student participation points if they can't text in? So it would be something to definitely consider. When I first got assigned a classroom in fall of 2015, it was not in a Wi-Fi room. I was like, my whole plan is going awry, that's not gonna work. So if the Wi-Fi is a bit spotty, they did mention that occasionally they would get kicked off and have to re-log in to the wireless. So you may have to be friendly as far as allowing time for actual submissions. Wait, I'm not done that. You know, I got to get my question answered. Certainly on the instructor end, like I said, familiarity with Web Campus absolutely helped, but it is a new platform. It's going to take you some time playing with things, moving things around. I largely used the same lectures as I had previous semesters, but had to go in and add those little icons that reminded me to show a video or to ask a question. That takes a few minutes. Oh, I had to make the questions. That takes a couple of minutes. But what was nice is maybe those are questions that then you use on your exam anyway. So I would say probably no more than 10, 15 minutes a lecture. That would be pretty generous as far as how much time I needed to actually implement the Top Hat materials. The buy-in from instructors, so it's great that you can get that immediate reporting or that students can see everyone's opinions on a matter, but then if you as an instructor don't try to further that conversation, it just dies up on the screen there. So it does require both students and instructors to participate, and if you don't link your web campus, then you're sort of transferring from spreadsheet over here to a spreadsheet over here and then uploading it to Web Campus, where our students do tend to go to look for their grades. So not entirely seamless, but largely a positive experience. I would absolutely use Top Hat again. I am teaching this semester, but a graduate level class. And I didn't see it translating quite as well for this particular course, but for an undergraduate class, I would have no hesitation at all using Top Hat. In fact, in my second year seminar class that I was teaching simultaneously, it was like, I wish I had Top Hat because I want to pull them in more than the 4 students that always answer my questions. So I could see it being absolutely valuable. The students seemed to like it. That was important to me. And just sort of fits the overall theme of, can we turn something that should be viewed or could be viewed as a distraction into an actual tool of engagement. So getting students to actively participate that might otherwise not. We are absolutely speaking their language. They are tech savvy. They are far advanced as far as matters of the internet go. This, at least in this attempt to dial into something that they innately know how to do and like to do. Also, one of my student comments did mention that because all the materials are available after, you can also review the questions, all of the content, so you're not tethered. The learning doesn't have to stop in the classroom. You can take it home and continue a deeper conversation or understanding. Probably the other feature of Top Hat that I failed to mention that I would have liked to incorporate is there are suggestions to just leave a running discussion open during your class for questions. So at the end of the class, you could pull it up and go, oh, we really didn't understand how cocaine affects neurotransmitters. So let me quickly revisit that point. So again, students that might be shy asking questions. And then lastly, it does force us on the instructor end. We're gonna have to institute it, but can we make things more interactive? You have to think about it, but ultimately it may help with overall engagement and then academic performance after that. So that was the goal of my using Top Hat. Like I said, not a representative, but a positive use of their platform. And I would encourage all of you to potentially be willing to give it a go. So just because we think we have a handle on them not using technology, they still might be distracted. So the bird outside the window might still be enough. And that is it for official presentation from me. Would you like this?